Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Lawyers will not provide
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. She doesn't do litigation, so, but she does contracts. She writes the contracts that try to make sure that you never go to litigation. Yeah. Yeah, well, yeah. Well, lawyers do definitely do have a problem with arbitration right now. However, precisely because because an arbitrator can say, look, we don't use lawyers. The fact that the lawyers are unhappy doesn't really make much difference. Again, if you're saying that lawyers would go and lobby to prevent this privatization from happening, I think that's true. That's not an argument against the privatization, though. It's an argument saying, look, we have a system where people can lobby in order to keep policies that are bad in place. I mean, basically right now in a lot of arbitration, there's no lawyers allowed. Right? I think that a lot of people would actually be happy to sign a contract with an arbitrator that says no lawyers allowed, because here's the thing. Let's see. From your point of view, suppose you could either have a trial where both sides can have lawyers or neither side can have lawyers. Which sounds better to you? Well, on the one hand, you can say, but if I don't have a lawyer, it's going to be hard to defend myself. On the other hand, if the other guy doesn't have a lawyer, it's going to be hard for him to defend himself. So in which case, assuming that one of you is not a self-taught lawyer, this actually probably does very little to change the odds, but it does save both sides money. So it's worth thinking about. I remember actually after the O.J. Simpson trial. Anyone here remember the O.J. Simpson trial? Yes. So O.J. hired the best lawyers money can buy, and then after the trial, I remember one of his lawyers was asked. He said, "But don't you think there's something unfair about the way that the rich can buy justice in this country?" And what his lawyer said is, "Well, no. What it shows is that everybody in this country should have the kind of justice that O.J. had." I was looking at this like, are you crazy? every single trial in this country should burn like $20 or $30 million? You know how much that would cost? And what would the point be? If everybody has the best legal defense that money can buy, then the prosecution has the best offense, the defense has the best defense, in which case, what does it change? It's like saying that every contest of tug of war should have half the country on its side. Like, that doesn't change anything. So all it does is burn a lot of resources, doesn't really change the outcome on average. So it would seem like it would be better to try to have fewer resources burned if it's not going to change the outcome on average. And this does seem to be what the market is asking for, because this is what private arbitration does. So you got a question in the back of the room. Could you please speak up? No. Louder? I can't hear you at all. Mm-hmm. 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 Sure. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. Right. So in practice, what would happen probably is that many lawyers would wind up getting jobs as arbitrators. I do think there would be a substantial fall in lawyer salaries, because right now we have a gigantic lawyer full employment program, which is our system of litigation. And under arbitration, things would be done so much more quickly. There'd just be a lot less for lawyers to do. Again, in terms of pure economic theory, it's possible. Then there'd be a lot more lawsuits because they'd be so much cheaper. In practice, I think that the actual increase in the quantity of lawsuits would be fairly small compared to the time savings. But it's possible I'm wrong. I don't think so. Yes, David?
Could you talk about how we got to use binding arbitration with auto insurance or other industries where there wasn't a clear threat, like the credit card example? Also, what do you think is kind of the next industry where that kind of process could happen? Does it just take changing the judge's mind so they stop actually enforcing those laws, or would it actually take repealing some laws like anti-discrimination laws?
I'm not actually. Yes.
Talk about copyright and patents.
Okay. All right. I'll try to remember all this. So, first of all, I'm not actually sure that courts do treat auto insurance contracts between auto insurance companies differently. The key thing is that if one auto insurance company has very little incentive to try to back out of the standard terms of negotiation for any one dispute. So even if it's like a $500,000 auto insurance case, if you're the auto insurance company that says, hey, we're going to go and fight this one in court, against another auto insurance company, this basically means that you have put yourself outside of the general deal, and that you're going to have trouble for as long as you're in business. So for a auto insurance company to back out on one case is basically be like ruining its reputation with all the other companies. And so I don't know that actually the law is any different for them. I think it's just that since they're big companies and they have lots of disputes with each other, they don't want to go and back out of the contract after the fact because that'll hurt their reputation. Whereas if you want to sue your employer, well, that is an enormous fraction of your livelihood, so you might want to back out of that after the fact. So your second one is, when is this going to, where will this come to next? Let's see. If I knew that, I'd probably be investing on that advice. So I'm not sure about that. So what about patents and copyrights? As you may know, there are a number of ways right now that firms are able to protect their intellectual property without patents or copyrights. One of them is just with trade secrets. Another one is with having people, basically what's called the restrictive covenant, where you sell something only on the condition that it not be reproduced, and that it can only be resold to someone else if you impose the same condition on them. Okay, so and again, in principle, you can sue people for that. Right now, once again, this is a case where this may seem crazy, but I think this is actually true. If this were also enforced by binary arbitration, I think this could actually be much more effective in preventing piracy than the laws we have now. Why is this? Well, under the laws we have now, suppose that your kid goes and downloads, puts up enough music on his website that it costs the seller or the creator of that music $100,000, right? And suppose they go and take you to court for this. Well, let's see. So basically, some big corporation is suing a teenager for $100,000. How do you think the jury is likely to find? Jury is, I think, pretty likely to say, oh, the poor kid, and also we're not going to go and take the house of the parents, the poor parents. I've got a kid. On the other hand, under binding arbitration, who is actually going to be making the decision? It's probably not going to be a jury. It's going to be an arbitrator. And again, the arbitrator might actually have been picked specifically because part of the whole point of it was that the guy is actually favorable to the holders of the copyright, or the holders of whatever you want to call it, the schmoppy right, the private version of the copyright. Okay, so private arbitrator might be willing to actually impose very harsh punishments for piracy, whereas the public court would not. So I think actually may be able to get stronger enforcement and better protection of intellectual property with this than you can get right now. Yes.
I think the better question might be to ask not which is going to be the next industry, but is there anyone that won't be affected by this? Because the reality is that to get private disputes in the courts is to ask somebody else to pay for your resolution of issues. Notwithstanding all the problems. And if I had to guess, I'd say within 30 years, you're not going to be able to get a single private dispute into a court ever. They're going to be reserved purely for, sort of conspiracy public policy.
Well, I hope you're right, but I am skeptical in that to actually allow private arbitration to go this far would be to overturn an enormous number of very popular laws.
I don't agree with you at all, because there's nothing to prevent private courts from applying public laws. And what we're really talking about is what's the mechanism and who resolves this thing. This is going, this is just a tidal wave towards privatizing this stuff anyway, for the simple reason that anybody who's half brain is not going to want to trust the resolution of dispute. Anything they care about. Just, and sort of have a, be surprised with respect to the judge is. I think it's going to be a total redefinition.
Well, again, I hope you're right. Again, sort of the whole problem with binding arbitration is that you may want to, the person who's going to lose, may want to back out of it once the situation arises. Right? So in order to get a job, you may sign a clause saying, in any dispute with my employer, I agree to binding arbitration with my boss's brother-in-law. However, once you actually get a dispute with the brother-in-law, and the brother-in-law is going to rule against you, it is very likely that you would like to go to the court where you know that the judge is going to be more favorable towards you. Right? And I think this is basically most of what goes on right now when you have dispute against an employer is ex ante. Before the dispute arises, the employee probably would have signed the contract, would have been to say, oh yeah, I'd love to do it because I'd never think of suing you anyway. But once the lawsuit arises, then the way the public courts work is there is a strong incentive to back out and say, well, binding doesn't mean binding. It means advisory. So again, as long as there's someone who, so again, there's a difference between saying that that someone would write a contract, would refuse to write a contract with saying binding arbitration. I think people would do that because in general, the right to sue is not nearly as valuable as the right not to be sued. But If you have a system where the courts will not respect binding arbitration, then I think that it will continue. But, yes.
What happens to like legal precedent, landmark decisions like Roe v. Wade or the Kilo case? Like what happens to that?
Well, I mean, right now in arbitration, you have you have precedents and important decisions where they do change. The legal codes do change. They do rewrite them. So I mean, it basically be the same thing. Although, I mean, I'd say it is unlikely that you would have the same kind of dramatic reversals that you would see in public courts, precisely because dramatic changes usually are not what customers want. Right? So customers usually want a mild improvement on a product that already works. They rarely, although occasionally, but rarely do they want you to start doing exactly the opposite of what you used to do. It's rare that McDonald's say, well, no more hamburgers. Hamburgers are over. Right? Usually what they do is they do a small modification. But I mean, the basic idea, evolution of law, evolution of rules. This is something that you'd expect to happen in this industry like any other. Progress happens. Firms are always trying to build a better mousetrap in order to get in order to attract customers. Yes. Jeff, are we out of time? Time for 2 more questions. So.
I was just wondering, I'm from Canada, I'm sure you're aware of the Mark Stein case going to the human rights judge.
Yes, yes.
Columbia.
Yes, I'm betting Mark Stein on an unrelated issue. So.
At any rate, I guess I do agree with the quality of arbitration.
Mm-hmm.
When I look at that case, it's been an absolute mockery. It's been a kangaroo court. And so my concern would be if the state then says, okay, you have to go to arbitration, well, what's to prevent them from sending you to some lockjaw arbitrator who allows these ridiculous evidence rules, and so that's just being a complete mockery and an injustice as opposed to trying to come to a proper solution.
Right. So, I mean, all I would say there is, what's the difference between a judge who makes a mockery of justice and an arbitrator who makes a mockery of justice? I mean, I think a judge is more likely to do so because, again, his incentives are much worse. But yeah, I mean, it's certainly possible for an arbitrator to do this, and especially if the judge says you have to go get arbitrated. Although, even there, I mean, from what I was suggesting, as long as public judges, followed a standard practice of arbitration, which is normally when you're doing arbitration, both sides are giving a list of names, and they are allowed to cross a number of the names off. That by itself is a very effective constraint against an arbitrator being totally unfair to one side, because if you're a guy who always rules in favor of one person, then the person who is going to be ruled against will cross your name off the list. Okay, so that is not a perfect check, but I think it is. It's quite a bit better than what you get under a public court. Again, of course, arbitrators don't have to do this, and in cases where the lawsuit is highly inefficient to begin with, then I think actually it would be more like what I said, where it would be a kangaroo court, but it would be an efficient kangaroo court. It would be like a kangaroo court where this is actually one that I like. So yeah, I'll go ahead and say this. So suppose that a student has a complaint about a professor treating him or her unfairly. Does anyone know how this actually gets handled in most universities? Yes. Well, what happens is that a panel of 3 professors who eat lunch with the professor who is accused reviews the case and decides whether or not you're right. I think this is actually good. I think this is a good system, not just to be a professor, because I think almost all student complaints are bogus. And therefore, the best way to handle it is to turn it over to a kangaroo court that will admit that they are bogus. Okay, so again, I could be wrong about this, but in my experience, 99% of all student complaints are brought by a student who has delusions of grandeur and they think that they should be rewriting the world of economics when they actually are doing their exam in crayon. So there's something to be said for kangaroo courts. Don't write them off entirely. There are cases where they do make sense. All right, so I have time for one more question. So I don't think you asked a question.
Yeah. But what about that 1% of students who do have valid complaints? I mean, they're being wrong. They've got no recourse, no way to redress
It does happen. Here's something that I don't like to say, but it's still occasionally we're saying life's not entirely fair. And if you can save millions and millions of dollars by occasionally having one student get a B when he should have gotten an A, that's not the end of the world. So I think I will end it there. Okay, so thank you.